Now think about what's happened. 38 years has passed. They're out in the wilderness. They're at Kadesh. They've been there before. In fact, that was the place where they sent the spies in. They're in that same location where they acted in unbelief and missed God's blessing. And they've got the tabernacle set up, and the congregation is all around. And they go out to the place where they get water there in Kadesh, and it's dried up. There's no water there. And immediately they start to complain. Now, if you've tracked with me, you remember in Exodus, they complained about water twice, and God provided water for them in the wilderness there. And yes, this generation now is going to do exactly the same thing. You see, mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, they complained about not having water. These children saw that, they experienced that, and now in their generation, they're repeating that same sin. Moses is going to get frustrated. He's told by God to just come in and take the staff. Now, this is really important. In chapter 18, verse 8, it describes there that Moses' rod, Aaron's rod, and the rod of all the other leaders of Israel were brought in before God, and all of their names were written on the rods. This was after the time of Korah, and God just wanted to end, it says, end your grumbling. And so Aaron's rod buds, and he tells him to go in and get that rod, the rod that I made almonds come on overnight that were ripe. And so he goes and he gets that, and then he goes back out to this place where all the assembly is there, and instead of speaking to the rock, he strikes the rock. Now, I would suggest to you there's at least 4 major things that we need to walk away with. The first one being this is, don't believe it. Every generation it seems like every generation is kind of like it's whispered to, and I think it's demonic, that our generation is somehow better than the previous generation, that we're better than others. I mean, that's just the bottom part of human nature and our sin nature. I mean, this generation was no better than the previous generation. We are just like the last generation. Now, I've watched basically 4 generations kind of touch, if you will. I was raised by my grandfather's generation. It's kind of like their children, my parents' age group, they kind of held them in contempt. They weren't cool. I mean, after all, Fonzie, comes along after that generation. And then, my generation, our parents aren't cool and our grandparents aren't cool, but we're like really cool because we have, tie-dye shirts or whatever. And then there's this younger generation that we've raised, and then it's like, well, we're cooler than our parents because we have iPhones, and our grandparents because they don't even know how to make their TVs work anymore. They have smart TVs, but they don't know how to use them, and so we think we're like, friends, we are not better off than any previous generation. I was in Bible college with a friend, and we were both studying theology and the Bible, and he was going to Papua New Guinea, and we were going to minister here in the United States. And I remember one day we were sitting around a table, and he says to me, Mark, I am so glad that I'm not staying here in America like you, because people in Papua New Guinea, they really want us to come. They want to hear the gospel. They want to be transformed by the Holy Spirit. And I'm sitting there going, have you learned anything in theology? See, biblical anthropology says that yes, we're made in the image of God, but it doesn't matter where you plant people in history. We are all going to struggle with sin and temptation, and the struggles of every generation is the same. It doesn't matter how much technology they have, the breaking of the 10 Commandments, the resistance towards God, idolatry is still going to be a problem, blasphemy is still going to be a problem, adultery is still going to be a problem, coveting is still, that is going to be true everywhere. So I didn't say anything, I just listened. But I was thinking that. How many of you ever thought something but didn't say it? You say, not very often. Anyways, okay. And so I didn't say anything. About 10 years goes by, and my friend Lyle, he reaches back to Jerry and I. We were in Colorado at the time, and he says, Mark, pray for me. And I said, how do you want me to pray? And he goes, you pray for me. These people here are just like, now, you understand, he's out in a remote tribe with very little technology, no technology. Everything that goes in has to be carried in with a backpack or up a river and then carried with a backpack or flown to airstrips and then carried from the airstrips. I mean, this is very, very primitive living conditions. And he says, these people are just like the people in America. They really don't want to listen about Jesus. They really don't want the gospel. And you know what? They love to steal and lie and blaspheme and cheat on their wives. It's just like America. And I said, no surprise. The reality is that we are more like everyone else than what we want to admit. You think about racism. I just mentioned that because of Pastor James's book. The reality is that it doesn't matter your skin tone. We're all sinners in the need of the same thing, the forgiveness and redemption of Jesus Christ and the transforming work of the Holy Spirit. That's what every single person needs. I mean, look at this. There's no water. They assemble, they complain, and rather than giving thanks that God's taken care of them over the last 40 years and saying, you know what, we need to have a prayer meeting over this water. God's provided in the past. He can do it in the present. Instead, they just grumble and they complain. Stop being crybabies. You should have learned that from your parents. You know what's sad is they did learn from their parents. What did they learn from their parents? I mean, if you remember the verses that we just read, verse 3, 4, and 5, they are almost saying the exact same things that their parents said before. So in other words, their parents, they remember sitting around the dinner table having manna and quail and hearing their parents say, you know what, this Moses guy, and he's let us out in the wilderness to die out here. We should have stayed in Egypt. I mean, these people have grown up out in the wilderness seeing God's provision, and yet they're saying the exact same thing. Christian friends, listen to me. When you and I have a sin propensity, and they had one, it was grumbling and complaining, unthankfulness, it's going to be transferred to your kids. And when it's transferred to your kids, it's called generational sins. In other words, the sins that I, rationalize and let go by. Anger, gossip, coveting, envy, whatever. Trust me, your kids will pick those same sins up, and that's exactly what this generation has done. Be careful, be careful, be careful. Don't believe the lie. We're just like the last generation. We need Jesus. We need the transformation of the Holy Spirit so that we can be a different people.